What I want to get to is the way in which the Jewish people is structured vis-a-vis the sources of their souls. But before we get there, I need to do some background. And some of it's fairly familiar. You know that the patriarchs represented certain spiritual, moral principles, characteristics. And of course, I should, for the sake of completeness, point out, when I say they represented those things, that does not take away from their being flesh and blood people, born, living, and dying. But they lived lives, they lived, so to speak, philosophical lives. And those principles are the main principles by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu interacts with the world, and the main principles on which the governance of the world rests. So it's a very fundamental trio of features. Now, Abraham represents the feature of loving kindness. We've spoken about this in the past. And Isaac represents the feature of strict justice. And as we pointed out, that in individual case they contradict one another, but loving kindness can lead you to set up a justice relationship by giving someone a job, a justice relationship over the long term. That's a way in which one can give rise to the other. Jacob represents a kind of amalgamation of those two features. Now, when you first learn about their definitions and you see that at least in a single case they contradict one another, the idea of amalgamating becomes a little challenging. How do you amalgamate two things that contradict one another? And of course, I read this in the literature, and I worked out on my own, trying to figure out a model for the kind of amalgamation that was being talked about. And I had a number of proposals, but none of them was satisfactory to me. I used math, and I used physics, and I used chemistry, and I used certain philosophical concepts, and I wasn't able to make sense out of it. My oldest son, when I shared the problem with my oldest son, he said, Abba, the reason you're having trouble is because you're taking a Jewish concept and you're translating it into non-Jewish disciplines. And it's a mismatch. That's not where you're going to look for the pattern, the model of the amalgamation. So I said to him, good, you tell me. And he did tell me. There's a concept, especially in Kabbalistic sources, of Or and Kli. Or means light, and Kli means vessel. And it is a complicated, subtle relationship. Sometimes the vessel is opaque. And the light, which is sometimes described as a spark, a glowing spark, because it's enclosed in an opaque vessel, no light escapes. It's its own little black hole. And therefore, there's no illumination. You don't see the spark. When we say that the whole of creation is supported by sparks of holiness, we mean sparks of holiness enclosed in opaque vessels so that we don't see them. Then when you hear that at the crossing of the sea, the people said, this is my God and I will glorify him. And the word this in English as the word zeh in Hebrew is a demonstrative. So you can only say this about something that you can point to, something that's visible, observable. So the literature says that the sparks of holiness supporting the existence of everything around them became visible to them. How did that happen? It happened by the walls of the vessels becoming transparent. The vessels didn't disintegrate and disappear. They weren't annihilated. They became And if you know a little bit about optics, when for example, light passes through glass, it doesn't pass through unchanged. That's why your glasses help you see, because it changes the light as it comes through. The light refracts, and if the glass isn't perfectly uniform, then it changes the path of the light rays, and can create a focus where otherwise you wouldn't have a focus. So the vessel becomes an ally of the light. Not just as it's failed to be a barrier to the light, it becomes an ally of the light. They work together harmoniously. This also is a representation of the relationship between the soul and the body. In that sense, the soul plays the role of the light, and the body plays the role of the vessel. And since the vessel can be opaque, blocking the light altogether, or the vessel could be translucent, passing only part of the light and restricting part of the light, the vessel has the power to oppose light. It has the power to do that. It depends upon what condition the vessel is in. And the symbiosis between the light and the vessel might require the vessel to play a variety of roles over time. It might not be required only to be transparent, let's say, or only to be focusing like a lens. And that's exactly the relationship between the soul and the body. In order to provide free will, the soul has to oppose the body. Body has to oppose the soul, I should say. It has to oppose the soul so that there can be conflict of motivation and a person can make a free choice. The goal of life, however, is to transform the body from something that is oppositional into something which ceases to be oppositional and eventually becomes an ally, so that the soul and body work harmoniously together. That's the kind of transformation from opaque to translucent to being transparent and a focusing lens. So this kind of relationship is something which is built into many Jewish contexts. And my son Nehemiah said, that's the model that you should use for combining loving kindness on the one hand and strict justice on the other. In the case of the third characteristic, which is Jacob's characteristic, it's the loving kindness playing the role of the light, and the strict justice playing the role of the vessel. So, let's work that out a little bit. Let's go back to the single case that we talked about yesterday. If I'm giving somebody money, it can't be simultaneously loving kindness and justice. Justice means that I owe him the money. He has a claim on me. He has a right to demand it from me. If I don't give it to him, I'm victimizing him. Why? Because I borrowed the money, because I damaged some of his property, because I sullied his reputation, he lost his job, I caused him a loss. There's something I did, which means that I owe him money. So justice then says, pay what you owe. That's not kindness. There's no kindness there. I have to do it. On the other hand, if I give him money for his birthday, I don't owe it to him. He has no claim on it. If I refuse to do it, I've not treated him unjustly, not victimized him. That's why it's loving kindness. So now, if you'll take a situation and ask loving kindness and justice to weigh in on what should be done, they're not going to agree. Because either the gift is owed or it isn't owed. If it is owed, then justice will say, give it. Loving kindness will say, maybe so, but that's not me. And if it isn't owed, loving kindness will say, give it, and justice will say, it's not owed. No reason to give it. And what we're supposed to understand is that in cooperating with one another, the loving kindness can achieve its goal by using justice as its means. The light sets the goal. The light gives value to the interaction because it's aimed at a goal that's valuable. But in certain circumstances, it can't function on its own. It functions only by using, in this case, strict justice as the means by which it can achieve the loving kindness that it wants to achieve. So we gave the example of giving a person a job where when a person is destitute and needs to gain support, the most loving gift you can give him is to give him a job, which sets up a long-term justice relationship, because by so doing, he earns the money, and he gets it by right, and he feels that he deserves it. So his self-esteem, his honor, his dignity are intact, and he has money to live on. So the goal is to benefit him. But justice is the mode of benefit that will create the greatest possible gift. That's one type of example. Another type of example, which you may or may not come to practice in your own lives with your children, is something called tough love. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's where you have a child who's in trouble, and the parent loves the child and wants the best for the child, but by simply reinforcing the child and telling him how good he is and how wonderful he is, and don't worry, and everything will work out, and paying off the things that he breaks, without taxing him in any way, that kind of loving kindness will be counterproductive, because he'll never develop responsibility. He'll never be trustworthy. He'll never be able to play a role for which he'll be compensated with a high salary, because no one will trust him, let alone earn the respect of other people and the love of other people. So here, what psychologists will try to teach the parent to do is, by being strict with him, by setting limits with him, by setting up consequences for what he does, in that way, enabling him to become responsible, being tough with him is the way that you express your love with him. And this is an example, again, of loving kindness, using an attribute like justice in order to achieve its role of giving him the maximum benefit. Now, on a slightly deeper level, one of the functions, again in the Kabbalistic literature, one of the functions of the vessel is sometimes to hide the light. Even if the vessel is translucent, from the outside, you don't know what's producing the light. If the vessel is transparent, you can see, is it a flashlight? Is it a glowing ember of fire? Is it a phosphorescent rock? You can see through the glass and see what it is. If it's translucent, all you see is that it glows, but you don't know what it is. So part of the role of the vessel is to hide the identity of the light, because sometimes that's necessary. Now let's take the tough love case. The child has done something for which tough love requires that he be penalized. What attitude should the parent project in penalizing him? Should he say, I really feel sorry for you. And in a certain sense, you're getting a raw deal. And I wish things would be better. What can I do? I can't help it. This has to be, and so forth and so on. Well, what comes across is sympathy, of course. But what doesn't come across is that what he did is bad. It sounds like something just fell on him and he needs, a rehabilitation. How do you get across to the child that this is bad, it's wrong? How do you teach the child values without showing your own disapproval? I don't think you can. Indeed, there was a paper in the Journal of Philosophy, 25 years ago, which was really an eye-opener for me, where when you talk about punishment, and the big debate in philosophy is, should punishment be utilitarian? You punish in such a way as to make this person and the world better, one possibility, or retributive, you did something bad, you deserve a slap. There was a third possibility, which I hadn't thought of, and that is punishment communicates values. Because if you say to someone, this is going to be a child or an adult, doing X is terrible. It's a terrible sin. It's a terrible crime. And when he does it, you say, have a nice day. He won't believe you. Because if it were so terrible, it should have consequences. And if you don't administer the consequences, he won't believe you when you say it's terrible. Things that are terrible, you do things to prevent them. And one of the ways you prevent them is by punishing them, so as to influence people not to do them. So punishment becomes a kind of communication. So in order to communicate to the child, or in some cases an adult, the seriousness of what's happening, you have to hide your sympathy for the child, your pain at his pain, your desire to give him a vacation and so forth and so on. You have to hide that. Because if you show that, then the communication of the seriousness won't be successful. So here's an example where the vessel hides the loving kindness. Because otherwise, the point of the exercise will be compromised. It won't be successful. Now, the Ramchal, who describes the whole of the management of history this way, says this in great detail. The goal, the light that's behind the management of history is what he calls Gilui Yichud, the revelation of the oneness of the whole of the creation, which is the means by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the goodness that he wants to give us, but it's clothed in a behavior of justice, good for the good and bad for the bad. Because if you revealed it, it would be self-defeating. You wouldn't be able to take seriously the consequences of what you're doing. So sometimes the light is hidden entirely, and sometimes it shows, and shows in different ways. So we have to think of loving kindness and strict justice as the light and the vessel, and they're operating together in a variety of manifestations. Sometimes the vessel will be opaque. It'll just look like justice. There won't appear to be any kindness behind it at all. And sometimes there'll be a glow to the justice, so it doesn't look like only justice. There's a kind of shine to it. Like example which even Chazal give, if the king punishes a subject who's violated a law, probably the mode of punishment, the experience of punishment won't be the same as when a father punishes his son for the same kind of transgression. Because the love of the father to the son will show most times in a way that the son will feel this isn't impersonal, this isn't justice blindfolded, as I've mentioned many times, that all the statues of justice of the ancient world are blindfolded. I don't know who you are, the law is the law. No, it's his father, and he knows that. So then that'll be like it's translucent. And there are times, as Ramchal points out, where the human failure is so great that strict justice would demand ending it. And at that point, loving kindness simply turns justice off. Because as we said a couple of times already, the whole exercise is to express loving kindness. So, that being the case, if you use justice as a means to express loving kindness, and justice says, let's end the whole project, the loving kindness can't tolerate that, and at that point, the justice is turned off. So the relationship between the light and the vessel is various, depending upon the circumstances of what the consequences should be. That's the kind of relationship you have between the two of them. Yeah.
Wouldn't, if in parenting, punishment as a means to give values to children, wouldn't that cause confusion insofar as if the child transgresses that value in the future when their parents aren't there to
With the parent what?
When the parents aren't there to punish them anymore, and see that the consequences are not the same as the parent would have in their home, for example, that will create a sort of cognitive dissonance when it comes to that value.
It's a very interesting point. First of all, I think that, if anything, the consequences when the parents aren't there are more apparent and more consistent. If you're really not responsible, you'll just lose your job. That's all.
Sure, but I'm talking more specifically about, let's say, if in your family, let's say you come from a religious family, in your family, breaking what you consider are values such as, I don't know, Shabbat, for example, let's just say. If you and your family, you broke Shabbat, you would receive punishment from your father.
Right.
Right? You go out into the real world after you leave the house and you don't hold Shabbat, and you see that nothing happens.
Well, it does. I mean, the environment in which you grew up, the friends that you had, the reputation that you have in the schools that you were in is all lost. And that's definitely a loss. Indeed, so it's not so obvious that there's not negative consequences that are involved in that.
Privately, though, in your own home, for example.
Well, but you're going to live isolated, no wife, no children, no one's going to know about it. You'll never have friends over for Shabbos and so forth and so on. That's negative in and of itself. You're living an isolated, disconnected life. So I think that that consequences are there. But the truth is, when you learn values, let's say, for example, you're, God forbid, a utilitarian, and you say that my choices are designed to maximize happiness. Okay, so-and-so is dying, and he's isolated, and you have access, and you could steal $1,000 that's in his drawer, and an hour later he's going to be dead. Is that what they're saying? Why shouldn't you steal it? Where in utilitarianism to say you shouldn't steal it? It's quite a difficult question. If you learned it as a value, then you won't steal it because it's stealing. So let me see if I can I'll elaborate this a little bit further, because there's a fellow, an Israeli psychologist, who I think really confused this terribly. I think his name was Ginot. I don't know how you pronounced it. Chaim Genat. Ginot, maybe. I don't know what he pronounced it like the French. I don't know how he pronounced it. And he had the following idea. Let's say you're schooling a child. He does something that you would like to discipline. So you're inclined to say to him, that's wrong. That's bad. He says, listen, that's just fantasy. You're hiding behind a pretense that there's something really wrong. Why don't you be honest? What you really mean is, I don't like it. Well, say what you mean. What he calls an I message. It's bothering me, it's disturbing me, it's upsetting me, I don't like it. What's the force of that message? The force is, if you do it twice, you'll get a slap. And you'll learn that from experience. When you do things I don't like, then I do things you don't like. That's the way the world is, right? He'll learn, he'll become disciplined, but you won't be fooling him and distracting him with this phony idea that there are really objective matters of the world that make things, determine the value of things. I'm not very good at this sort of thing, and I read about it, and I sort of was influenced by it till I mentioned it to my first wife, and she said, how's he going to learn values? All he's learning is that you want to avoid slaps? This is what you do. You want to get money? This is what you do. It's reinforcing pure selfishness. It's just making sure that you understand this is bad for your interests. It's bad for yourself. How is he going to learn values? Well, this fellow is influenced by foolish sophomoric philosophy that everything's relative and there aren't any real values of it and so on. People ask me, should I get an undergraduate degree in philosophy? And I say, as a professional philosopher, no! Because almost everything you'll believe about philosophy after an undergraduate degree will be false. So go study chemistry. There, at least, what you'll believe may very well be true. Right? So the idea is that when you learn values, then the consequences don't have to be there to restrain you. The consequences were just in order for you to appreciate that something here is of value in and of itself. That's what you... sounds strange because of your philosophical prejudices. Let's just talk about art. Right? Would it be enough for you in teaching someone about art to say, this picture's worth $4 million, this picture's worth $4,000, and this picture's a throwaway? You want to make money? Learn it. Learn which ones will get money and learn which ones won't, and then you'll be able to make money in art. Would you think that was all there is to learn in art? I don't think so. There's great genius in art. And also a lot of stupidity. But there's great genius in art. There's great depth in art, and you have to be taught to see it. A lot of it is not there unless you're taught how to see it. I know, because before I got married the first time, I couldn't see it at all. My first wife had to teach me how to see it. So similarly, if all you're taught is that some actions will get you a slap and some actions will get you money, you haven't become fully human because you haven't realized that there are values in what you do. So, and then it's the values that determine later what you do, not whether you get the reactions that you continue. In other words, the behavioral training that goes into teaching the value doesn't have to be continuous forever. I have more to say about why that would be, but that's the bottom line here. Okay, so now these two features work together like a vessel, light in a vessel. Now, how was this created? Well, Abraham, as we said, was loving kindness, and Isaac was strict justice, and Jacob was the amalgam. Jacob knew both his father and his grandfather. He was already an adult when his grandfather died. It wasn't that Jacob was created this way. Jacob had to mold it for himself. He had to create it for himself. He was given the elements of each, but it was his spiritual creativity that enabled the gelling of it into a concrete characteristic to come to existence. And that's why I think it's very important to appreciate that he experienced his father and grandfather. It wasn't just a divine gift that the similar features were given to him and he worked on it on his own. No, he did it by living with them, interacting with them, learning from them, being influenced and inspired by them, and then taking that and melding it into a coherent whole in the way in which that we described. Now, one more background feature. There's a necessity for Jacob because pure loving kindness has limitations in how it will be able to express itself and be successful on its own terms. Pure loving kindness, without any justice, without any strictness, just giving, as I mentioned now a couple of times, can end up not producing the best possible result. Person who, where the psychologist says to the parent, you've got to learn how to do tough love, and he says, I can't do that. When my child cries, I'm lost. I'm putty. I can't stand up to it. Well, yeah, it was designed to do that to you, but you have to grow a thicker skin. And that means that just giving, just providing, in the brutal example of when you have a close friend who happens to be an alcoholic, and he comes at 1:30 in the morning and says, I ran out, please give me a bottle of gin. And I say, I love you. And therefore my answer is no, because it's not good for you. So there, the kindest thing to do for him is to withhold. But the characteristic of kindness doesn't withhold. The characteristic of kindness just gives. Well then, sometimes the characteristic of kindness is going to be self-defeating. Similarly with justice, if strict justice is applied purely, the purpose of justice is to make a better world. If you think of justice socially, it's to make a cohesive, integrated population where people take each other into account, where people support one another. Justice includes charity also. And where people are able to cooperate with confidence because they know that things are going to be handled in a fair fashion. Well, if justice says, because of what you did, you deserve to die, it's over. And if imagine the extreme case, which, as I said, the Ramchal considers, where justice says the whole human experiment is over, because justice can't abide what they're doing, then justice ends its own application because there's nobody left to apply it to. So each one of these has an imbalance. And if you look carefully into the lives of Abraham and Isaac, you'll be able to see, especially with the Midrashim, how that imbalance caused trouble for the projects they were involved in. Abraham didn't want to expel Ishmael from the house. And Sarah told him he has to. And God said to him, she's right and you're wrong. Because his loving kindness and support and sympathy and so forth and so on were blinding him to the need that Ishmael could not stay in the house at that period of time. Similarly, Abraham had a relationship with his nephew Lot when they left Ur Kasdim and they came to Israel and went down to Egypt and came back up. and Lot had serious weaknesses. And according to at least one statement in the rabbinic literature, Abraham held on to him because he wanted to do something for him. He wanted to improve him. He wanted to elevate him. And the rabbinic source says the whole time that Lot was with Abraham, God didn't appear to him. Because in this case, he wasn't able to help. And he would have been better off if he simply said, no, this I can't do, and cut it off. And he didn't. So the appearance of prophecy was delayed until that relationship was severed. So each one has its weakness. And when you have the combination, the amalgam in Jacob, the perfect, harmonious working of the two of them together, as I said, in a variety of interactions, you might think, you'd be forgiven to think, that from now on, everything is Jacob. Maybe there's some deep reason why it had to go through pure loving kindness, and then strict justice, and then an amalgamation, but the amalgamation is the final product, and it is the superior condition. Indeed, Chazal call Yaakov Bechir Sheva Avos. In certain sense, the most precious and most successful of all the patriarchs. And if that thought is in your mind, it comes as a surprise to hear that forever after, in the Jewish nation, in the Jewish people, the souls of Jews can be traced back to one or another of the three patriarchs. Why would there be souls that are traced back to Abraham and souls that are traced back to Isaac? Why aren't all souls traced back simply to Jacob? And by the way, a symptom of this of the question is the fact that Jacob's other name is Israel, which is the name of the nation. Abraham didn't give his name to the nation. Isaac didn't give his name to the nation. Jacob gave his name to the nation. And by the way, just to prevent possible misunderstanding, when I say that Jacob is the choicest of the patriarchs, it doesn't mean that he's has more merit than the other two. It doesn't mean that he's closer to God than the other two. It's because Abraham and Isaac created two twin foundations on which Jacob stands that he achieved the greatest perfection of the three of them. But he achieved it using what Abraham and Isaac produced from before. On his own, he didn't do it. So in terms of merit and closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as far as I know, we don't picture any one of them any closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than the other two. But he achieved that shleimus. So then it's a surprise that we would have souls being traced back to Abraham and Isaac. And the message, I'm saying what I believe to be implicit in certain places. I didn't see this word for word, but I've spoken to people about it, and they tend to feel that it's a correct idea. The message is that the amalgamating, the process of recreating the Jacob meld from the Abraham and Isaac ingredients, that process becomes a national process. It's a cooperative national process. And that has to continue on. It's not that it happened once for the patriarchs, and once Jacob comes into the world, that's the platform for the rest of the people. No. The platform for the people is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But that's why we almost always mention them as a trio. Because all three are contributing foundations, not just history, nor prehistory. And that means that part of a person's self-image has to be, there's a society, and it spreads out in terms of the units that we're familiar with. There's a nuclear family, and then there's the clan, and then there's the relatives by marriage, and then there's the local neighborhood, and then there's the city, and then there's the national entity. When there's Golas, different nations, so on and so on. It spreads out. The person has to see himself playing a role in each of those groups, and the role he plays is supported by the roles of others who are different from him. Going back to the question was asked about politics in Israel and the war and everything else, here you're seeing how deep the idea that we spoke about then is traced. You can't be a spiritual success unless you recognize, appreciate, value, and coordinate with people who are different from you. If you really surround yourself with people who are the same as you, you're going to be a spiritual failure. Moses and Aaron represented different characteristics, as did Miriam. Moses and Aaron had to work together. The message again is either one alone isn't going to make it. Indeed, in the Kabbalistic structures, Moses and Aaron are like two legs. And if your one leg is tied up behind you, you have to hop on the other one. That's pretty awful. And you walk on two legs. You could use each hand separately, but you can't. It's very hard to use a foot separately. So you then have to say to yourself, what am I? Where do I come from? What's my natural inclination? Where might the limitations in my natural implication be? Just like Abraham had limitations and Isaac had limitations. And look for the one who can complement you and be able to use the complementarity to limit you, to be a way to overcome the limitations that you have. And also, what can you contribute to somebody else overcoming his limitations? And even the Jacob figure, someone whose soul traces back to Jacob, his job is to do the amalgamating of the conditions, which would mean a Jacob figure, in general terms, should associate with both Abraham and Isaac figures and work to amalgamate them, because he's an amalgamator. All of that is part of your spiritual growth. Then you look around and you see the recommendations for how a person should undertake his training. For example, in the Talmud, it says your scholarly education has two phases. One, the first phase is to master material, just memorize it. After the Mishnah was composed, anyone who wanted to be a scholar had to memorize the Mishnah. And when you're memorizing the Mishnah, you have a teacher, and for a while the Mishnah was oral. So someone had to teach it to you. And there they say the best thing is to have one teacher, because different teachers teach in different ways, and maybe they won't have exactly the same memories, and you'll get confused, and so on and so on. To get the basic material, you go to one teacher and learn from him. But when the question of analysis comes up, asking questions, reconciling what look to be contradictions, and drawing consequences, then it's appropriate to go to several teachers, because each teacher will have limitations, and by receiving input from different teachers, you'll be able to pick up different abilities. You'll also have the experience to know where you fit best, instead of just being parochial and staying with the first teacher and staying with him. If you go to several teachers, you may find that, although they all teach you something valuable, this one helps your mind to develop better, and therefore you choose him as a teacher. When I first came to Eretz Yisrael, the yeshiva invested in a year's study for me, and there were two great teachers in Yerushalayim at the time that I heard of. I had to decide which one that I wanted to. So I went to hear a shir from each one. I chose with Tzvi Kushelevsky, and the other one was, when I want to name, it escapes me. It was in Chavia. I'll think of his name. I hope. So the other Rav I went to first, he spoke for 2.5 hours, beautifully organized, beautifully explained, everything fit together. The ideas were fascinating ideas. I realized that if I'll sit with him for a year and take notes, I'll have Torah to say for the rest of my life. Then I went to Tzvi Kushelevsky. Well, his shir was war. He presented ideas, and there's an objective from there, that one objective from there, they're arguing back and forth, and yelling and screaming. But I thought, here I'm going to learn how to learn. I'm not just going to get pre-digested material that I could copy and regurgitate. I'm going to learn how to think. So I chose with Tzvi Kushelevsky, and I was not sorry that I did. Yeah, it was a process. If I had a nickel for every time he called me a dope, I'd be a rich man. But I learned a lot. My whole processing, my whole standards for learning were deeply affected by what I learned from him. So that's where I needed to be to complete my education. Other people would need to be with other people to complete their education. So here's an example again where you recognize there are differences and you look to find the kind of input, something of the different inputs. Yes, you should do anyway. The Sfarim say the following: in Olam Haba, you'll have accessible to you to learn the Torah of any sefer that you learned once. But a sefer which in your whole lifetime you never learned might very well be off limits to you. Well then, it's a good idea to get around. It's a good idea to look broadly. And I took that seriously. You know, there's the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. There's also a Jerusalem Talmud. So for a certain period of time, I learned the Daf Yomi. For a period of time, when I was learning the Daf Yomi, I took the Jerusalem Talmud and I learned it simultaneously, at least so that in Olam Haba, the Jerusalem Talmud will be open to me. I didn't finish it, but at least I had several Masechtos that I learned, and that's something that I can say that I'll have open to me. So this is the idea of recognizing that there are differences and celebrating the fact that there are differences and learning from the differences and knowing that there will be friction. There is friction between loving kindness and justice. There is friction. And living with that friction and, in fact, valuing the friction. Valuing the friction. Without going into the current corrupt political structure, but do you really want to live in an echo chamber? I hope you would anticipate being terribly unhappy living in an echo chamber, where everybody always said the same thing. Anybody who said something different was thrown out. How would you grow? How would you develop? How would you discover the things that you're not right about? It would be intellectual death to live that way. And the same thing is true with having moral priorities and spiritual priorities. There are different ways to do this. So one should look for this and then think in terms of the amalgamating process, which doesn't mean that it's not like homogenizing, you know. You mix wine with water and you get dilute wine, which is not good water, it's not good wine. No, it's the vessel and the light. The light remains light and the vessel remains vessel, but they work together to get a joint effect in various different ways. That's the kind of structure that we really need to try to pursue. And if each one of us feels that it's necessary for him to participate in that, then we can project that onto the community as a whole, and hopefully we can improve the kinds of over-exaggerated antipathy that people feel for one another, which has very base psychological sources. My Rebbe Zatzal, Boston Rebbe, preached this, and he preached it actively. He was on a first-name basis with the greats of all the different schools of religious Jewry.
You said Boston Rebbe?
Yeah, but he did. We saw it. We saw him do it. So that's the message that I'm sharing with you. I think it's part of the message of understanding the patriarchs and the different mitos that they represent. Okay.